So PewDiePie, not PewDiePie.
I mean, probably just
Pew. Pew. All right.
Felix.
And he is famous for. How would you describe what he's famous for?
Well, he got his start years ago with Let's Plays. So essentially, he would simple gameplay with audio commentary. I want to say he was one of the first to use the scare cam, just basically using a webcam just aimed right at him, which made sense as he played horror games and would kind of overact his finger quotes scared reactions.
Which doesn't sound particularly interesting to me, but actually it's insanely popular. Like, I mean, it seems like he has made literally a living out of doing that.
It was, yeah. I mean, rule of first adopters, he was probably the most noticeable, and that it sort of spiraled from there. Now he makes a lot of money. He doesn't really do Let's Plays as much now, but so yeah, I want to say it was the 10th. Yeah, it was the 10th. He's live streaming, which is different. His Let's Plays were always like post-productions, edited video, while live streaming is obviously live, and drops the N-word at another player, which is like it's his second controversy this year.
Right.
Because the first one was when he paid some people on Fiverr to dance around a sign that said "Death to all Jews."
Right. And originally he kind of came out in defense of that and said that he was just, poking fun at how serious people were taking this and all that. But then the Wall Street Journal actually went back through all of his records and all his, postings and found that he had at least 9 anti-Semitic comments sprinkled throughout the years there, here and there. So, that it's enough times that it's kind of hard to make the claim that it's just a one-off kind of event.
Yeah, I think the difficulty with using "it's just my sense of humor, and if you don't get it, then you're the problem" as a defense is, how do you define, like, is it meant to be? I don't know. It's reframing the problem,
right?
Where they're the victim and then you're the aggressor for not understanding humor. But he especially doesn't have that defense now.
This is true. And I think it's really interesting that corporations are taking note of people like this, and when they create a controversy and when they do something that's outside of what our social norms are, they're actually taking action. So as a result, he's actually losing money now.
A little bit.
Drop in the bucket?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's Camposanto. Obviously, they've taken down, or they appealed to YouTube to use the DMCA takedown strike against him, and have stated that they plan on using it against him. And it's a little bit concerning because, on the one hand, I don't fault them for not wanting to be associated with someone who has had a string of controversies in the past few years, but they're going for kind of a punishment based on something that he said in a very unrelated video.
Yeah. So we'll break it down a little bit further because the DMCA, I had to look into that. That was the Digital Millennial Copyright Act.
Millennium.
That's not millennials, specific millennium, and not Millennium Falcon. But essentially, it makes it so that places like YouTube are not liable for copyright infringement as long as they prove that they're trying to take it down once companies point it out to them. So they have to respond quickly and whatnot. And there is a way, like if you get flagged for takedown, you can disagree on YouTube and put a complaint in 24 hours after the original contact has been made. So that is kind of what you're talking about in terms of where they're pursuing action against him, is that by playing this video game, he is infringing upon copyright. But that's kind of also a weird gray area, in particular with Campo Santo, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have a problem with it beforehand.
Right.
They had a problem with it because of something he did while playing another game.
Right. And in fact, it looks like they've encouraged live streaming on their website and been like, hey, you should go ahead and do this. So, you know, interesting level of gray in here. Because, like, on one hand, the idea that somebody is called out for racist shit is kind of a good thing. But then on the other hand, the way in which it's kind of happening from the corporations is kind of I don't know. What's your thought?
I mean, there's no real hard court precedent about Let's Plays, and they do kind of exist in a very strange vacuum legally, because you can argue that it is transformative, but it is still relying very heavily on copyrighted material. You know, a Let's Play of Firewatch, like the one that Camposanto took down, consists of basically two things: gameplay footage of Firewatch itself, which is a copyrighted, you know, it's Camposanto's intellectual property, and PewDiePie's dialogue over it.
Right.
Is that enough to count it as a transformative work? Especially then if you monetize that.
Well, explain transformative.
Transformative. Something that I believe a transformative work is taking an existing property and altering it to a significant degree, so that it kind of becomes its own unique entity.
So this is where we get into like fair use doctrine, which is the idea that there are some things out there that, you know, the public has a right to use in creating essentially their own work. So to kind of bring it back home, you know, if you're writing an article and you quote somebody in it, that's fair use doctrine. You're quoting something off of their copyrighted material. You're not stealing the whole thing. You're still recreating something of your own. So this is the same kind of principle that you're talking about here.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, just making sure I'm getting it all.
Yeah, it's Let's Plays are weird. It's just a weird situation all around. But I guess my personal concern is that, considering that Camposanto was able to appeal to YouTube at will, it, you know, because again, the whole controversy is not with their property. They're using somebody else's property as sort of an excuse in some ways. But it also kind of shows that, and you look back at the history of YouTube, they tend to be nicer to corporations than content creators. And if a DMCA takedown is filed by a corporation, it will usually go through, and that might give other corporations who are less ethical a little bit more power. I know Nintendo is known for abusing their power when it comes to gameplay footage. And a few years ago, there was a studio that's no longer financially solvent called Digital Homicide that tried to basically destroy a YouTuber that I'm a fan of, Jim Sterling, because he posted gameplay footage of a game that they made that was terrible and called it terrible. And that was before they tried to sue him for $10 million.
Jeez. So really fringing on the rights of free speech in this way.
You can use kind of less than ethical DMCA requests to squash original work that does contain copyrighted material, yes.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so he used the N-word.
Using, yep. That much is unfortunately clear.
So
there's a huge explosion of people both like demonizing him and in support of him. And then
it's unfortunate that for me personally it's so hard to like him, because I can definitely see how, I would want to take his side in some regards, not in obviously in saying the N-word or any of the anti-Semitic shit that he's put out there, but like in terms of what you're talking about, in terms of the legality of what is happening to him. But man, he's such a douche. He calls I'm sorry, he just calls all of his fans bros, and they're all part of his bro army. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I'm very aware of that. It's part of his persona. He was good at cultivating a very specific style, but oh God.
Yeah, 57 million subscribers, and he got the Ruby play button from YouTube as a result of that, which was made out of rubies.
Yeah, if you're on the absolute like top 10 list or like even top 100 list of YouTube channels, you tend to be treated nicely. That's probably your livelihood at that point.
Yeah.
It kind of has to be.
Yeah. Especially when you're doing daily postings, like that is your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other weird thing about it is that YouTube kind of does exist in a weird limbo between, because they host his material, but he's not an employee of YouTube. So it's, they can't necessarily, they don't have as much control over what he does. And, sometimes the worst that people can do is revoke advertising.
Right.
Which has gotten even more difficult since his last controversy earlier in the year. And when the adpocalypse began. Because...
The adpocalypse?
The adpocalypse. Earlier in the year, it was found... from what I have read, there have been 2 instances that really started the adpocalypse, air quotes. One of them was PewDiePie's last, like the death to all Jews prank, and the other one was the revelation that Hezbollah was able to make propaganda videos and basically, talk about how awesome terrorism was and monetize those videos, and we're actually making money on YouTube.
Jeez.
Yeah. It's hard to really move on to any other topic after terrorism.
Making money off of YouTube.
Making money off of YouTube, but
yeah.
At that point, YouTube did try to move towards being a lot more stringent. When it came to who could get ads and who could have their videos monetized and have ads run on them and who couldn't. But what they've done is it's automated. There's an AI that determines whether or not it's advertiser friendly. And that can make things kind of difficult because you can have 2 videos that look very similar. One of them does not get ads because the AI has determined that it's not a proper video for advertisement. That, in addition to the fact that a lot of advertisers are a bit more wary about content on YouTube because of the fact that it is completely unmoderated, or it's not completely unmoderated, but the sheer volume of it means that you can get some stuff, kind of slipping in uncomfortably. Sometimes some social media has had that problem as well, and I know Reddit has had that issue where there were some ad problems because, like, some of the white nationalist subreddits that are allowed to exist would be getting ad revenue as well.
Right.
So the adpocalypse kind of began when, PewDiePie had that one video plus Hezbollah plus all of these other situations. More than likely, I would also assume from a lot of the videos or a lot of the channels that sort of take advantage of copyrighted content, or a lot of them will just kind of produce the same things.
Over and over again. I've had that experience with the Harry Potter audiobook. keeps getting taken down.
I gotcha. Yeah, there's a pretty lucrative market for that sort of thing, and also for, I believe, children's videos as well. If you can get on that loop, because especially now that autoplay is a feature of YouTube and things will just continuously play,
Gotcha.
if you can get into the suggested videos of usually it's parents with kids who just need to keep them entertained for half an hour. But it works though, because if you get associated with that playlist, and it'll just loop over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
But they're starting to get a bit more wary about that. Obviously, Disney cut all ties with PewDiePie following that event, and I believe his YouTube Red series was also canceled. He got hit pretty hard for that last one, but I feel like he might be a little bit safer. Unfortunately, he might be a little bit safer now as opposed to then, because that was just a general humor video, and this time he has the forces of like video games on his side, and the culture of video games is a unique one.
Right. We'll talk about some of his supporters too, because I mean that was something that, besides the people who obviously are into the video game side of things and don't want to see the rights to use some of the video game content in creating their own personal, videos, there are other people who have kind of come to his defense. And who are some of those people?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, Ian Miles Chong of The Daily Caller justified it by saying it was a heated gaming moment, which kind of explains all you need to know about why like Gamergate especially really showed just how toxic gaming culture can be.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fact is that, and as someone who is, I'm kind of a geek. I play games a lot, and I know that part of the community is tolerated. It's not seen as inherently wrong to use racial slurs or to use just toxically misogynist language.
Right.
Because it's just a game, don't take it so seriously. And the fact is that heated gaming moment can be used to justify racial slurs, shows just like how toxic gaming culture can be.
Yeah. And this ties back into a lot of interesting psychological studies that are out there about when you're in those heated moments and what comes out of your mouth, it does represent what you do believe. So when you're saying stuff like that, maybe that's not something you walk around, but it might be an undercurrent. And by allowing that undercurrent to continue to exist, that represents a pretty big problem within society. So it's kind of that idea of implicit bias, that this is coming forward more and more in our culture, the understanding that, yes, on the surface, you might not be a racist asshole. And yes, you may not even think of yourself as a racist. You may try not to be racist in your way that you deal with situations. But when your actions are taken collectively, you see that there's this bias. And I see the allowance of that kind of language, even when you're in an intense emotional situation, to be that undercurrent. So
Sort of the filters removed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, when I hit my finger with a hammer, which I do often when I'm trying to repair things, like, there's some stuff that comes out. It's not pretty, but it's definitely not racial slurs either. So there's that. Got that going for me.
It's at least one positive.
Shit. Oh, shit. So the guy that you just mentioned, Chong, some context behind who he is as an individual there.
Oh, man. I'm not terribly familiar with Chong, honestly. I know that he works with the caller. I've seen his name passed around a few times in some of the like Gamergate circles. to be perfectly honest, aside from this moment and knowing that he works for The Caller and thus for Ben Shapiro, so the former Breitbart editor, I know next to nothing about the man.
Okay, so loose connection to kind of that alt-right movement.
Yeah.
Strong connection? With a high five?
I'm not sure. Maybe all the time. At this point, I really don't know, but I do know at the very least that there are some people in the alt-right that like PewDiePie for some of his previous statements. So it's I don't want to automatically allege a connection, but I would definitely not put that out of the running.
Gotcha. Do you think that PewDiePie has felt emboldened in the last year to create content like this? Because I know previous to this, he's issued several apologies for different things he said, like using the word gay a lot, retarded, neither of which.
Rape jokes.
Mm-hmm. Or is this just part of his normal way of doing, where he does something super offensive and then apologizes for it and then does more super offensive things?
I'd personally say that it's he issued an apology video following this latest live stream debacle, and seemed to simultaneously say I can't keep doing this. This is wrong, and also saying there's no excuse. I just need to get better. And sounding like he was making sort of an excuse was that it was just it was a heat of the moment decision.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this dual narrative of I didn't mean to, it was just an accident, and that's totally terrible, and I'm so sorry, everyone. And it kind of allows you to take either message from it. And then, according to at least Metro, he almost slipped up again during another live stream of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds that same week. After the apology video. So I'm honestly not sure. If I can clearly tell that he wants to change, then maybe that's a thing. But at the same time, I'd honestly hazard that he might just not give a shit about it.
Yeah, just enough to try and keep his base or keep his viewers and keep that money coming in. Yeah, interesting. One other thing that kind of crosses my mind in hearing about this is the rationale of using offensive material as a basis for jokes. And there are various comedians who say that you've got to push the envelope, that's important to do, that encourages conversation and dialogue, and by doing that, they're addressing societal issues. Do you think little PewDiePie falls under that category?
Well, comedians are typically funny. That's probably my first reaction. It's really subjective. On the one hand, I want to say absolutely, and in the context of comedy, yes, there are some comedians that I know that talk about very controversial subjects and joke about very controversial subjects, but the way that they have structured what they do, they're pretty careful to make sure that it works in. Have you ever heard of the term punching down?
No.
Okay. So punching down is I've heard in the context of comedy is you don't want to make jokes that make fun of people, I guess in terms of our social hierarchy beneath you. So a very rich man making jokes about poor people is very different than a poor man making jokes about the very rich.
That
So
makes great sense.
you always want to punch up.
Right.
So in the same way, like rape jokes, you know, there are really two kinds of rape jokes. There's rape jokes that make fun of the victim, and there's rape jokes that make fun of the absurdity of how we deal with rape, right? And make fun of the aggressor. You can see that between like what PewDiePie would do years ago before he renounced making rape jokes was if like an enemy's attacking him in a game or something like that, he would literally just scream, "He's raping me." I guess that's the entirety of the joke, personally. I don't really understand.
Not a lot of maturity there.
Not really. And you could make the argument that it's kind of trivializing. You look at like Louis C.K. and some of the jokes that he's made, which are, if you really think about it, a lot worse. But the way that they're constructed, George Carlin would do the same thing. George Carlin also joked about the absurdity of how we treat rape, rather than necessarily attacking the victims themselves.
Right.
So again, very similar concept, but taking pains not to attack the people that it actually hurts. And that on its own is probably the first thing I would say, which could easily determine whether or not like controversial subject matter can be talked about. But even then, even if someone wants to structure their humor to punch down, I mean, they can do it. I don't agree with it.
Right.
But I also don't think that that works as a shield. And that tends to be something I've noticed where you don't get the joke, therefore you can't really criticize me.
Right.
Is like a really disturbingly common defense.
Right. You just don't understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't understand it. You're taking it too emotionally. You know, that's just meant to be funny. Yeah. And I would agree as well. I think everything you said rings really true in terms of how I see those kinds of jokes. There's definitely a level of maturity and weight that they have to be approached with. Like thoughtfulness, I think, is really important. And I, from again my very limited interactions with this YouTuber, the thoughtfulness is not his strong suit. In fact, probably not what he really makes a lot of money off of.
Yeah, not really. And then that defense alone it's not even relevant to like what's happening right now, because if you do go and listen to the live stream itself, or even just excerpts of the live stream, you will find that what was going on was he was literally just frustrated and fuming at someone. So claiming it doesn't even work by claiming that it's supposed to be controversial humor. It's just him getting angry.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess again he was saying within the context of his show in general that it's humorous, but yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting in a negative way. Cool.
That's cool.
Anything else?
I don't really have that much to add.
I don't think I do either. All right.
Well, that's episode 1.
That's episode 1. So see you guys in a couple days.
That's right.
All right.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.